Last year I decided to virtually cover FrightFest, the UK's biggest horror film festival, and this year I thought I would do it again because apparently I wasn't traumatised enough the first time. Now, with last year's festival I was able to see 11 films, and it was a very mixed bag in terms of the quality of the films on display. For as many good films as we got, there were just as many not so good films. This year, on the other hand, I only saw 7 films at FrightFest, and going off of the 7 that I saw, the quality was considerably lower than the previous year. There were still some really good films in the mix, but considering what I saw and the amount that I saw, it was quite literally like trying to find a needle in a haystack in terms of finding the really good films in this year's lineup. With all that being said, let's get into everything I watched at FrightFest 2025, starting off with Bambi: The Reckoning. Yes, that is an actual film that has been made. I am not making this one up. This is from the same universe as the dreaded Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey that came out a couple of years ago. I have not seen that film, but I've heard it's terrible. But it is part of that same universe, and I kind of went into this with very low expectations because I know the reputation those films have, and even films of a similar ilk, like Screamboat, which came out earlier this year, which I did see, and I did write a review for Filmhounds magazine, and it was not good. It's one of the worst films I've seen all year. So, going off of all of that, yes, my expectations were not high for this film, yet, having seen it, it pleasantly surprised me. It's still not an amazing film by any means, but there is still stuff to appreciate with Bambi: The Reckoning that I can't really say about the other films in this weird subgenre that now exists, like Screamboat and Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey. For example, the film opens with an animated origin story to explain why Bambi is doing what they're doing. And I thought that was a really nice touch. It really took me by surprise, and I thought it was a pleasant way to get things going, whilst also harkening back to, the roots of Bambi in the first place, which is the Disney original film. Everything after that, again, I thought it was just going to be very run-of-the-mill and, people are just there to die. And for the most part, that is kind of the case. The characters are possibly the worst aspect of the film. I think the way they are written is not very good. I think a lot of them are very dislikable, and there isn't really much personality to them outside a few specific stereotypes. But where the film really impressed me was with everything else. I think the way it is shot is not amazing, but it's decent for what it is. I think the CGI for the titular deer is actually quite impressive. Again, it's nothing mind-blowing. It's definitely not like Avatar levels of good CGI, but considering what you go in expecting this to be and, the reputation these films have, the CGI deer is actually very impressive, and there are times where it looks very convincing even though you're well aware it's CGI. Apart from that though, this film does exactly what you would expect it to do. It is a mutated Bambi running around killing people, and that's kind of all you get from it. There is attempts at emotional depth with its characters, but it kind of falls flat. Like I said, this film, in the grand scheme of things, isn't the best thing in the world, but I appreciate the efforts that were made to make it better than the other films in this weird subgenre that now exists. The next film I saw was called The Rose, directed by Seth Daly. This one actually did intrigue me. I thought the premise seemed interesting, I thought the trailer looked pretty good, and thankfully this is the first film in the FrightFest lineup that I can legitimately recommend as a good/decent film. The premise is very simple. A young girl wakes up in a mysterious cornfield and is hunted by 3 masked men who have weapons. That's kind of all you need to know going into it, because the less you know about this film going into it, the better, because it does have a couple of twists and turns that I personally wasn't expecting that genuinely surprised me. For me, this film felt very reminiscent of last year's Strange Darling in a few different ways. First of all, the film is shot on 35mm film, like Strange Darling was, and it gives the film this very gritty, textured quality to it that almost feels like you're watching some form of exploitation film from the 70s that you've just kind of stumbled across. It worked for Strange Darling, and it works just as well here. The other similarities between the two films is its structure and the way it executes its premise. There are some ways in which the two films differ quite drastically, but when you look at them from a core fundamental perspective, both films are split into chapters, and both films are about cat and mouse chases and are very much rooted in that thriller genre that they're going for. And in that sense, I really liked how both films went about the approach. They're again slightly different, and I did like the non-linear style that Strange Darling took, and I do think that is the better film in my opinion. But The Rose does also take similar leaves out of that book, and I think for the most part it kind of works. I think the 3 chapters work quite well. I think the middle chapter is probably the weakest because it grinds everything to a halt at one point, and you can start to feel like it doesn't know what it's trying to do, but then it almost feels like the film itself realizes that and very quickly picks the pace back up again. But there is a big chunk of that middle act where it just kind of feels like it's going nowhere. Character-wise, I understand why it's doing what it's doing, but it felt a bit too slow in my opinion, whereas the first and third act are where the film really shines. That opening act alone is worth it because that sells you on the premise that you've come here for, and I think in terms of a great opening segment of a film, I think it really succeeds because there is 0 dialogue in that opening. It purely relies on visual storytelling of this young girl trying to escape these 3 guys in a cornfield. That's all you need to know, and that's all it really delivers within that first act. It almost feels like a separate little short film in itself. After that, I then watched The Caretaker, directed by Luke Tedder. This film follows a mute man named Eddie, who becomes the caretaker for a very posh school called Lockbridge Academy, which is run by this very shady aristocratic family called the Aberdeens. So the biggest drawing point for me on this one was the fact that it was part of the First Blood strand at the festival, which is purely just for directorial debuts. And sometimes the films can be hit and miss. The Caretaker is pretty much a good example of that. But occasionally you do get some hidden gems, and I feel like The Caretaker has a lot of potential in it. Some of the things it's going for feel a bit too ambitious for what it's trying to do, but I think the thought and the ideas are there. I just think they could have gone a bit further in a few areas. I think the strongest thing about this film is its central mystery, and it kind of takes over the film after a certain point. I think the way it handles that aspect I thought was very good, and I also really liked the central relationship between the characters of Eddie and Mary, because I think the actors do a good job, and I also think it feels genuine in its execution. Unfortunately though, the one aspect of the film that I thought it would really use to its fullest potential was the fact that Eddie is mute. And despite bringing it up a couple of times during the main film, it doesn't really become a main factor or a main issue in the thing that he's trying to do. I feel like if you're going for this complex mystery thriller approach, you really need to make the main character's disability a main drawing point as to it being a hindrance in solving the mystery in the first place, or it be causing more issues than it needs to across the course of the film for one reason or another. And at first it kind of hints that it's going to do that, but after a while Eddie's just mute, and that's kind of it. It doesn't really add anything outside of a few conversational scenes. Everything else just feels like it could have gone about it the same exact way if Eddie was not mute or not. However, where the film really hones in on that aspect of Eddie as a character, but also really delves into themes of childhood trauma, is in the start and end of the film, where it starts to get a little bit more experimental, and those elements of the film I really loved because, again, it justified the disability of the character and why they chose to give that character a disability in the first place. It justified the reasons why he always feels and looks so hurt all the time, And I just thought creatively and visually it was an interesting way to take the film. I just wish it had done it a little bit more. After that, I then watched Redux Redux, which is easily the best film I saw at this year's FrightFest. It's a really compelling blend of sci-fi thriller storytelling that also somehow blends road trip drama elements in there. And yeah, this one is really good. This is probably the only film I saw at the festival this year that I would give anything above 3 stars to. Redux Redux is fantastic. The basic premise of the film is that it follows a mother who keeps travelling to parallel dimensions to find the person who killed her daughter, and basically she just keeps killing him over and over again in these different parallel universes until she feels some form of justice. Now, the film instantly sold me on that premise alone, but there was a part of me going into it that was a little bit concerned as to how it would stretch out and maintain that premise for the entirety of its runtime. Thankfully, I was proven wrong, because this film knows how to keep that premise interesting throughout its runtime. I thought everything about this film was fantastic. It's shot brilliantly, and I think also the cast are fantastic across the board, especially Michaela McManus and Stella Marcus, who play the main duo at the centre of this film. Again, similar to The Rose, this is another film that you really should know as little about going into it. I think just knowing that initial premise on its own is enough, because it takes a lot of twists and turns that I did not see coming, and I really liked how it constantly kept me on my toes and was a lot more emotionally driven than I was expecting it to be. And again, that was really refreshing to see, because sometimes FrightFest can get a bit much if you're just watching back-to-back horror films of people getting killed and mutilated, and it can be a bit much at times. So to have a film that kind of abandons the horror stuff and is just a really well-written and well-made thriller, drama, sci-fi mix-up was really refreshing. Plus, this film is surprisingly funny in a few places, which again was a nice surprise. And now we go from the best film at the festival to the worst. The next film I watched was The Home, directed by James DeMonaco and starring Pete Davidson. I didn't really have high hopes for this one, but I was expecting it to be better than it ended up being. The basic premise of this film is that Pete Davidson plays a 20-something graffiti artist delinquent called Max, who is serving time doing community service at an old folks' retirement home. However, there are strange goings on in the retirement home. The inhabitants of the retirement home are all a bit strange and demented and weird, and he is also told not to go to the 4th floor. The premise is fine. It's everything you'd expect a horror film like this to have. And I didn't really know how it was going to execute its premise. I just wanted it to be decent. And within the first few minutes, I felt that something was off. The film very, very quickly rushes through the basic things of Max's backstory that you need to know to care about his character, which really isn't enough. We are literally given like 2 minutes to show that he's a foster kid and that he lost his brother when he was very young, and that's kind of it. That's kind of all you're given, and then you're expected to just kind of take that and run with it for the entirety of the film, and it obviously doesn't work. You are given very little to care about Max. He is a fine character, but bless him, Pete Davidson is just trying to get this film over and done with, which is a shame, because he is a good comedic actor, but is also just a good actor full stop. If you've seen him in films like Bodies, 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 or The King of Staten Island, he has proven himself to be a very good actor that can lean into comedy where needed. In this film, he's trying to do straight up just serious dramatic acting, and again, he can do that, but when he's not really given much to work of, like a good script or decent direction, you get a result like this where he feels like he's half-arsing it 90% of the film. On top of that, the way that the plot unravels is rather predictable. You can kind of see jump scares and twists coming from a mile away. It tries to throw you off in a few places, but whenever it does, it just feels frustrating rather than, legitimately compelling or deliberately trying to throw you off. The scares are really awkwardly handled. There are some elements of the film, or there are some moments where Max will just look at one of the residents of the retirement home and they will do something that's creepy, but the way it's shot, the way it's edited, and the fact that it lingers on the reaction shot or the creepy thing for just a bit too long makes it really amateurly handled, or at least it feels that way. Thankfully, the next film I watched was a lot better than The Home, and it's called Your Host. It stars Jackie Earle Haley, who most of you will probably remember as playing Rorschach in Zack Snyder's Watchmen. This one was really good. It's very simple. It's basically about this guy who kidnaps people in his basement and decides to put them through torturous games as he proceeds to present the whole thing as if it was a live TV game show. That's kind of all you need to know about the film, and that's kind of all I knew going into it. And this film worked for me. It's not my usual cup of tea. It's not the sort of horror film that I would go out of my way to watch if I wasn't watching it as part of a festival, because it does lean into the issue that some later Saw films has, which is that there are times where the film feels like it's just trying to gross you out for the sake of grossing you out with gore. But there are elements to this film that really worked with me. There are some that don't. The main one being the main four characters I thought were all very dislikable. And as the film goes on, you actually find out that there's even more reasons to dislike some of them. But yeah, that was kind of my main issue with the film, is that the first opening scene that you're meant to be getting to know these characters really falls flat because there is no chemistry between them. They're just arguing the entire time. It's only when they're in the traps that you actually start to see them connect to one another, which you're supposed to believe from the word go, but I didn't. And they're just all very dislikable for some reason or another, which I thought, again, was a bit of a weird choice. But the film kind of knows this and very quickly moves on from that to get to the stuff you've come to see, which is where the film actually kind of thrives. Once you get to everything in the basement with Jackie Earle Haley, that is where the film really, really works, because it gets to it as soon as it can, and the film has a pretty rapid pace to it once it gets going. I think Jackie Earle Haley is phenomenal in this film. I think he finds that really perfect blend of playing chaotic and maniacal and a bit mad, but also he's very broken and is fragile in places, and there's a lot of layers to his character even when he's not really saying a lot. And I thought he did a really good job in this film. I do think he is the standout of the film, because he is kind of the one chewing the scenery, but in a way that isn't too hammy or over the top. The kills are disgusting. When this film goes for it, it really doesn't hold back. It is brutal. There is one death in particular that feels really drawn out, even though it actually kind of isn't. But that one in particular is kind of nasty, and I appreciate it for just really committing to it. But yeah, this film, if you're going into it expecting one thing, you're going to be satisfied, because the film kind of knows that's what you're there for and tries to get to it as quickly as it can for the sake of the story. I also thought there were some interesting developments and twists and turns in the later half of the story that I thought worked for the most part, especially considering the context of the characters and the story that we'd had up to that point. And finally, the last film that I saw at FrightFest 2025 was 213 Bones. I genuinely knew nothing about this film going into it, and this one's a weird one for me, because it's not awful, but it's not good either. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, and it rides that very fine line of being a bit hokey and a bit crap, but at the same time, there are elements that I can see that they were trying to do and that I can appreciate. And there are a couple of moments that actually kind of worked for me, but I feel a little bit like with this film that I did with The Caretaker. Even though The Caretaker is the much better film in my opinion, I feel the same way to that as I do with this, whereby there are good elements, there are bad elements, and I can see what it was trying to do, but the execution in the end makes it fall flat in a little bit. For example, I like the fact that it focuses on a class of students and that they are trying to stop these murders happening. That whole kind of Scooby-Doo style approach to the central mystery of why these murders are happening, I thought was, for the most part, pretty well done. These characters can range from being stereotypical to dislikable, and there is no middle ground. That aspect was fine. The kills are, again, fine. The soundtrack is weird because there are a lot of points throughout the film where I actually couldn't quite figure out what time period this film was set in. They're all dressed like they're in the 80s, yet there is music playing as if it was the mid to early 90s. And then there's other choices that make it feel like an early 2000s teen comedy. I don't quite know what it's aiming for or where it sits or what time period it is actually set in. But yeah, apart from that, this film has a decent premise. I think it's executed some of it decently. But I think the main issue this film has is that it doesn't know what to commit to at certain points. And overall, I feel like it just lost momentum about halfway through. So guys, that is everything that I saw at FrightFest 2025. Let me know if you went to the festival and if you saw anything good. Please let me know in the comments down below what you saw, or if any of these films intrigue you and you want to see them when they're widely released. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.